Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Riya Gandhi and today's video is second part of Feminist Literary Criticism. In part 1, we discussed what is Feminist Literary Criticism, who were its precursors, and the three most important waves of feminism. In this video, we are going to discuss the 5 most important feminist theorists, at the same time discuss some of the most important strands of feminism. So stay tuned till the end of this video and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Video, we discussed the 3 most important waves of feminism, with the first wave of feminism demanding equal rights with men, specifically the right to vote. The second wave of feminists expanding and transcending beyond this concept, wherein they try to bring the attention to their bodies, talking more about radical notions and breaking traditional customs. Now, this second wave of feminism, as we discussed in the previous video, was largely influenced by radical protests and movements like the anti-war protests of America going in war with Vietnam, various other revolutions like the Student Revolution. One of the most important strands of feminism or offshoots of feminism arising out of these radical protests and movements during the second wave of feminism was radical lesbian feminism. Now, radical lesbian feminism was largely motivated by the fact that the mainstream feminist discourse did not include lesbian rights. At the same time, they wanted to challenge heterosexuality and wanted to include the concerns, the lived experiences of every lesbian woman. Started in the United States in the 1950s and the 1960s, the lesbian feminist groups created their own manifesto, which is titled as The Women Identified Women, and it was published in 1970. In this particular manifesto, they tried to expand the term lesbian and include it as a metaphor which symbolizes every woman's challenge, every woman's rage against the oppressive patriarchal structures. One of the most important theorists associated with radical lesbian feminism is Adrienne Rich. She is often considered to be one of the most widely read and influential poets of her time because she included the themes of oppression and lesbian identities in poetry. Not only that, but in one of her most important essays titled as Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence, she has talked about how heterosexuality is something that is not natural. It's not innate or intrinsic. Rather, it is enforced and it is a political institution meant to disempower women. Adrienne Rich is also credited for coining the term lesbian continuum, which refers to a range of female relationships, not necessarily sexual, that they share with each other. It's mostly talking about the solidarity, the friendships, which will help them combat patriarchy. The second most important strand of feminism was black feminism, which emerged in the United States in the 1960s and 70s as a reaction to civil rights movement and feminist movements. Why? Because the feminist movements were primarily talking about white heterosexual women and completely marginalized the voices of women of color. That's why black feminism caught itself in a double bind, wherein they questioned 2 important things. First, they questioned the masculinist patriarchal ideologies of the black movement, and second, they questioned the racism of feminist movement. You have one of the most important writers, Alice Walker, inventing a whole new concept of womanism, which is talking about a more socio-cultural as well as an intellectual framework that includes the lived experiences and struggles of women of color. Alice Walker coined the term womanism for the first time in her short story collection, You Can't Keep a Good Woman Down, that was published in 1971. and later expanded and critically discussed this particular term in her essay collection In Search of Our Mother's Gardens that was published in 1983. In the previous video, after we were done discussing the first and the second wave of feminism, we discussed the third wave of feminism and how it opened its gates to global influences. We discussed how that there was this fall of communism and a rise of post-colonialism, which led to the development of one of the most important strands of feminism, which is called as post-colonial feminism or third world feminism. Post-colonial feminists constitutes a group of writers who belong to different locations, geographical locations, at the same time different places who had once been colonies. That is why it is also called as third world feminism, wherein the phrase third world denotes that common colonial past, trying to establish that political unity, that solidarity amongst the feminists, wherein they try to challenge not only just patriarchal oppression but also any kind of colonial oppression. That's why they have tried to include themes such as marginalization, poverty, exploitation, and unemployment. These post-colonial feminist writers were very critical of Western feminism or the mainstream feminist discourse because it only answered the concerns and issues of white heterosexual women. Not only that, but they sort of tried to homogenize, universalize women's experiences. Well, according to these post-colonial feminist writers, that is not the case. In reality, every woman is subjected to her own specific socio-cultural, religious, as well as national backgrounds. And that is what they tried to bank upon. That is what they tried to focus on in post-colonial feminism. Some of the most important post-colonial and third world feminist writers are Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, who is known by her seminal work Can the Subaltern Speak, which was published in 1988, and Chandra Talpade Mohanty's Under the Western Eyes that was published in 1991. Having discussed three of the most important strands of feminism, let's shift our attention towards some of the most important feminist theorists that are frequently asked in UGC NET English exam. The first important feminist theorist that we are going to discuss in this video is Elaine Showalter. Elaine Showalter is an American literary critic and a feminist who was popularly known by her work A Literature of Their Own, which was published in 1977. In this particular work, she has tried to emphasize and provide importance to women's writings, to which she has called that they are radically different from men's writings. Because when you're talking about women's writings, they try to foreground female experiences in a very real manner. But her most significant work, which is repeatedly asked in UGC NET English exam, is Towards a Feminist Poetics that was published in 1979. In this particular work, she coined the term Gynocriticism for the first time. Gynocriticism refers to the historical study of women's writings. It actually refers to the production and analysis of texts written by women, rejecting male theories and models to analyze female experiences in a text. Gynocriticism as an entire concept has significantly contributed to the development of feminist literary criticism. Apart from the concept of gynocriticism, Elaine Showalter has talked about women's writings in three most important stages or phases. The first phase is what she calls as the feminine phase that happens somewhere from 1840 to 1880, wherein the women writers during this time period mostly wrote while imitating the male writers. So the kind of language, tone, style of writing was largely in close association with the male authors. For example, George Eliot. George Eliot did not only adopt a male pseudonym, but the way she wrote, the kind of writing, the style that she adopted was closely in imitation of her male counterparts. The second phase is what she calls as the feminist phase that happened somewhere from 1880s to the early part of the 20th century, wherein a lot of women writers writing during this point of time protested, rebelled against the prevalent patriarchal attitudes. So, the representation of female characters in their texts showcased an outright rejection of norms, traditions, and customs. The last phase is what she calls as the female phase that basically began from the latter part of the 20th century, wherein the women writers, they wanted to find out their own identities. They wanted to find out their own voices, and as a result of which they engaged in the creative as well as the artistic processes. Elaine Showalter rejects the first and the second phase of women's writings because she believes that somewhere or the other, these women writers are writing either in imitation of the male writers or they are writing in response to the prevalent patriarchal attitudes. So the relation between their male counterparts is still there. But when it comes to the female phase, women writers are trying to find out their own identities. They are trying to find out their own voices, and this is what she considers as the most important phase. Elaine Showalter's delineation of women's writings into these three phases has led to a significant development and understanding of feminist literary criticism. The second most important feminist scholar that we are going to discuss in this video is the Australian feminist writer Dale Spender. Dale Spender is often credited for recovering the writings of women writers who were largely undervalued and marginalized during the time that they were writing. Her most important work, which is repeatedly asked in UGC NET English exam, is Man-Made Language, that was published in 1980. In this particular work, she has talked about how language is an extremely important part of our reality and how it is used by certain hegemonic structures to reinforce gender stereotypes. For example, in a lot of patriarchal societies, language is used to label women. So, let's talk about how women who obey certain customs, traditions, and the patriarchal structure are often termed and labeled as good girls or good women. But what about women who do not obey these patriarchal structures, who showcase a bold rejection of norms and traditions? These women are often termed as neurotic, abnormal, or even as witches. So, you see, this is how the language works. This is how language is used by the dominant patriarchal societies to reinforce gender-based stereotypes and to reinforce patriarchy. The next important feminist writer that we are going to discuss in this video is Helene Cixous. Now, Helene Cixous is considered to be one of the most important writers, especially from UGC NET point of view, because of her foundational essay, The Laugh of the Medusa, which was originally published in French in 1975 and later translated into English by Paula Cohen and Keith Cohen in 1976. This essay is considered to be a foundational essay because it has led to the development of post-structuralist feminism, and it is in this essay that Cixous has developed the concept of l'écriture féminine. Now, what is this concept? Remember, we talked about Dale Spender and how she says that language is often used by dominant patriarchal societies to reinforce gender stereotypes and how it is a male-centric language. Similarly, Cixous has talked about l'écriture féminine as women's genre of writing, which is in stark opposition, which is strongly antithetical to male-centric writing. Now, what is l'écriture féminine? L'écriture féminine refers to a genre of writing by women which is revolutionary, which is subversive, because it is talking about the language of female body. Now, what does that mean? Male-centric writing, especially the style of writing by men in most of the texts, it's very traditional. That is, it is very structured, it is orderly, and it is arranged in a very logical manner. But when you look at the female writing, especially when you talk about l'écriture féminine, it is more free-flowing. It is very non-linear, it is cyclical, it is almost like all over the place, because women's writings cannot be tied to a certain structure, cannot be tied to a certain tradition. So when I talk about more free-flowing writing, it is talking about the style of writing, almost like a stream of consciousness method. Therefore, l'écriture féminine is a mode of writing for women by women that reserves a space for an escape for women, at the same time has the capacity to subvert male-centered language. The next important feminist writer that we are going to discuss in this video is Luce Irigaray. Luce Irigaray is a Belgian-born French writer and a feminist who is importantly known for her work This Sex Which Is Not One, that was published in 1987. Inspired from Simone de Beauvoir's concepts of women being represented as the other, Luce Irigaray has talked about how women do lack subjectivity in the Western discourses through the way they are represented in the male-centric language, wherein women are often portrayed and considered as a deviation from the norm. For example, if man is considered as a man, a woman will not be considered as a woman, rather she will be portrayed as a not man. If man is considered as an A, she will be represented as not A. So you see, according to Luce Irigaray, women's subjectivities, her separate identities are not acknowledged. Rather, she is often acknowledged in relation to or as a deviation to the norm, which is the man. The last important feminist writers that we are going to discuss in this video are Sandra, Gilbert and Susan Gubar, who are largely known for their foundational work, The Madwoman in the Attic, which was published in 1979. Wherein these writers have tried to examine the Victorian literature that was produced by the women writers. Now first let us understand, where does this title come from? Now the title, The Madwoman in the Attic, actually alludes to Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, wherein there was this one character called as Bertha Mason, and she was locked up in an attic by her husband, Mr. Rochester. The work begins by drawing the reader's attention to the dichotomous representation of female characters in a traditional patriarchal and male-centric discourse, wherein either the female characters would be represented as pure, angelic people or good women, or they would be represented as rebellious, frightening monsters. As a result of which, a lot of women writers struggle to transcend beyond this dichotomous representation, wherein Gilbert and Gubar have talked about it is important to move beyond this, because then, only then, you will be able to combat the patriarchal discourse. Now, while dealing with this, a lot of women writers faced an anxiety, which Gilbert and Gubar have called as the anxiety of authorship, wherein these women writers did not have legitimate role models of women writers who did not succumb to this dichotomous representation of angels or monsters. At the same time, Gilbert and Gubar have discovered palimpsests. Palimpsest refers to the double-voiced text, wherein even though certain women writers did succumb to the patriarchal discourse and talked about the angelic and monstrous female characters, there were certain hidden layers within the text which were highly feministic and subversive. These texts were known as palimpsests. These were some of the most important feminist writers and their works that are repeatedly asked in UGC NET English exam, so make sure that you go through their works in detail before you appear for your exam. Now, if you want to understand every other literary theory and their works in detail, then don't worry, I've got you covered. In my live classes for UGC NET English exam preparation, I am breaking down every complex concept and topic related to literary criticism and literary theories in a very simplified manner, which will provide you the confidence to ace UGC NET English exam. Not only that, but I'm also breaking down every important period, author, poet, dramatist and their works related to the history of British English literature and Indian English literature in a very detailed and comprehensive manner. The best part about these sessions that these are live one-on-one sessions, which means that I can provide you personalized guidance tailored to your needs and requirements, trying to fill the possible gaps in your UGC NET English exam preparation. If you want to know more about the courses I offer, the sessions I take, and the notes I provide, feel free to check out my TopMate page at topmate.io/Riya Gandhi. I've shared the link in the description box below, so don't forget to check it out. That's it for today's video, folks. If you found this video on feminist literary criticism informative and helpful, please like it and share it with other UGC NET English aspirants. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss any videos that I will be uploading on such important topics and concepts related to UGC NET English exam in the future. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you in the next one.